How's it going, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. So today we are talking about an evolving story going down between Arcitys and the Atlanta FaZe. It sounds like after further details have started to come to life that in fact the two are going opposite directions. Yes, you heard that right. The Atlanta FaZe, very well it looks like, are going to be different coming into this next title. Now we're gonna be looking through a decent amount of tweets, so bear with me for a moment, but these are the latest reports and rumors. This one's coming in from CDL Intel, aka Crone, basically saying that, hey, Arcitys not only removed Atlanta FaZe from his bio, which of course is always an indicator, but has in fact been exploring options outside of FaZe for the last 36 hours and is a restricted free agent. Now, what is most interesting about this is that if you do take a look, and if that exact hour is to the T, right? 36 hours. This tweet came in the early morning of August 20th. You go back 36 hours, that would be the early morning of August 17th. Now, why is this date so significant? Because if this is true, Arcitys is looking for different teams, told for the last 36 hours, he's been inquiring about different options early on August 17th. What would later happen on August 17th? In fact, in the middle of the day toward the evening, that is when Optic Texas announced that both Dashy and Illy were free agents. So again, nothing 100%, but if the dates and the times do match up, it very well could mean that Arcitys decided to look for other options because of the timing of what was going down with Optic Texas. There were a lot of rumors indicating that, hey, maybe Shotzi's having conversations with Atlanta FaZe because he's technically an unrestricted free agent. Dashy, who was by definition a restricted free agent, was also rumored to be going to Atlanta FaZe. We heard all kinds of talk about how a trade could go down between Dashy and Arcitys. While that doesn't appear to be happening anymore, the timing of it is incredibly intriguing. So I know I talked about there's gonna be a few tweets that we look at. Here's another one, and these are obviously coming in from Arcitys himself, talking about how good things fall apart for better things to fall together. A lovely little quote, a sad one at that, especially if that means that he is no longer going to be on FaZe. And then later a reply from somebody came in and said, I hope it's your choice to leave. Obviously talking about Atlanta FaZe, and he says, LOL, yeah. No, nothing is 100%. These are all just rumors. This is all just speculation. However, we are still going to talk about it because, as I like to say, roster mania is all about rumors. So there is a chance, right, when we talk about this situation involving Arcitys and the Atlanta FaZe, Optic Texas, maybe they were involved, right? Maybe the reason why we are seeing, Arcitys and Atlanta go their separate ways is because of the Dashy and Shotzi conversations, during that 24-hour period, or maybe it was a little bit longer than that, when it sounded like Optic Texas were moving their separate ways and then decided to get back together. Maybe Atlanta FaZe was dealing Arcitys in those options, and then as Optic Texas said, you know what, we're gonna go ahead and stick together, that then left Arcitys out to dry. Maybe what also could have happened is that Atlanta and Optic Texas didn't have any conversations. There were a lot of people who think that maybe Atlanta saw the announcement that came out from Optic and of which Dashy was available, and then they started to reach out, and as they reached out, Optic Texas said, nope, we're not doing that, we're going to come back together. And Atlanta's like, oh no, we just advertised that we were willing to have a trade, and now Arcitys gets wind of that and now he wants to leave. I don't think that's probably likely. And then the last one is, maybe Atlanta FaZe from the beginning has just been looking for an Arcitys replacement, whether it was for Optic, whether it was for different teams. Maybe this entire time they have had this plan in play. Regardless, right, it is shocking if this does in fact come to light, because this was a team that we thought might never make a roster change, especially after the year in Cold War that they had. A team that looked like they could be the next dynasty. And we don't talk about that very lightly, but what they were able to do in Cold War with the competition being as high level as it is, the dominance that they displayed, and honestly, the expectations of dominance that we expected for them to have coming into Vanguard was sky high. Maybe even too, with all of the hard results, with how difficult of a title Vanguard is, I think there are a lot of people out there who would probably go into Modern Warfare 2 and think, yeah, Atlanta FaZe, they are absolutely the favorite. And now it sounds like they could be splitting apart. And, I mentioned this a lot throughout the season. If you are a little bit newer to the channel, we talked about this on LandO's lock-ins a lot. After all the results, for them to have won a world championship, right? To finally do it with this team, to be able to accomplish that feat. After you win that, anything other than just straight up domination feels like you're falling off, right? If you go from just constantly winning championships, winning majors. You go into COD champs and you just roll everybody. Then to the next year, and not only are you losing, they're getting to the finals, but just constantly coming up short. And as a competitor, you can't make that justification of, oh, it's just the game this year always. Or maybe, you know, the competition's better this year. No, it's a self-evaluation type of thing. How are we winning this year, but now we're not winning this season? And it all started with the Major 1 finals. You know, a loss to Optic Texas, a team that they had constantly beat last year. They lost to them not just once, but twice, one of those being a reverse sweep. They then go into Major 2. They lose to one of the greatest Cinderella stories that we've seen in Call of Duty Esports history. Nobody expected LAG to be able to make that run, especially with a substitute. So Atlanta loses to Optic, which I'm sure was not like humiliating, but definitely hurt a little bit. They then go into Major 2 and they lose to LAG of all teams. And then you go into Major 3 and we're thinking, okay, surely it's not possible, right? Surely it's not possible. We go into that winners finals, of which Seattle pulls off one of the most amazing comebacks and back-to-back games that I have ever seen, like a 4v16 in control, a 100-point plus comeback, and that following a hard point. Seattle would go on to take them down and then beat them in the grand finals. And on top of all of that, we headed into champs just a few months later, and they would lose to the LA Thieves, barely missing the mark over and over again. After the season that you had last year, after all of the dominance that you displayed, has to be one of the more frustrating seasons out of anybody ever. Okay, so if Arcitys is in fact a restricted free agent, what should we be looking out for? Right now that the Atlanta FaZe thing sounds like it could be done, what does Arcitys do now? What does he do for what it sounds like these last 36 hours? Maybe having conversations with teams, having meetings. What teams could he be headed to? Also, what impacts is this going to have on the rest of the league now that he's available? What happens with Atlanta FaZe? Who could their fourth be? Now it's time to talk about that. And I will stress that both for Atlanta FaZe and for Arcitys, you have to look out for that date of August 22nd, which as of the recording of this video is going to be in 2 days. So I highly suggest that you stay tuned on August 22nd, because that is the day that new deals can be done. Nobody who is currently a free agent can be added onto teams. If Atlanta FaZe is looking to sign a new player, they cannot do that, or at least an official announcement most likely will not happen until August 22nd. So definitely stay tuned for that very day, because we are in the final stages of what could be early season roster mania, what could be a lot of these moves. They are right around the corner, especially Arcitys and Atlanta FaZe, again, if they are in fact splitting apart. But if we're talking about Arcitys, I mean, the resume speaks for itself, right? I believe he just recently passed Crim6 as the highest earning Call of Duty Esports player of all time. He's been in 3 COD Champs Grand Finals in the last 4 years. He's a 2-time world champion. People forget how talented that he was before he joined the Chicago Huntsmen, later joined the Atlanta FaZe. He was the guy, top 5 player in the game, Mr. Do-It-All. He would sacrifice, you know, maybe a few extra stats just to make sure the team was doing what they were supposed to do. But on that early E United team, he was something else. Had one of the greatest individual events I have ever seen. Arcitys will be a hot commodity by a lot, and I mean a lot of teams, probably all 11 other teams if they had the opportunity to get him. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and talk about the teams that Arcitys could be headed to. I know we talked about this a lot yesterday, but we got to cover it again now, especially that it sounds like he is going to be out the door. So Boston Breach, first team, flex position is going to be open. You know, he could play maybe alongside somebody like Methods. Maybe Arcitys comes in for Methods. They bring in another flex. A lot of options maybe for the Boston Breach. However, I don't know if that's the right team right now. I think the SMGs are important. I don't think there's really any chemistry here between Arcitys, Nero, and Vivid. I don't think that Boston is at the top of the list right now for Arcitys. Moving into the Florida Mutineers, you know, there's a lot of rumors right now going on with Florida. You know, maybe they're building around somebody like Dave, who would absolutely be the main AR. Arcitys would come in as the flex. I think if you're bringing in Alec, I mean, if whatever he wants to do would be my guess. There's a lot of LAG players who are linked to maybe going over to Florida. Again, just doesn't feel like the perfect fit right now. I think that Florida would love to have somebody like Arcitys, but if there's not a clear plan in play, I'm not sure if the Mutineers, again, much like Boston, would be a top destination. And speaking of LAG, I mean, I really do think that there could be some potential for this one. I believe the Gorillas decided to team option everyone but Gunless, so he obviously is listed as a free agent. It sounds like 2, if not 3 players from the Gorillas could be headed elsewhere, so that would obviously open some things up. You know, maybe Slasher still exists with the Gorillas. If LAG is still wanting to be in the Slasher business, maybe you bring over Arcitys in a position like the flex for Spart. Maybe you move forward with Slasher, Arcitys, and Hook at this time. Now, one thing that I will point out that I think is going to be incredibly important for somebody like Arcitys is stay tuned to what happens to Attach, right? I think that he is, without a doubt, until like a few of these players have come onto the market, obviously with Arcitys now here, he is one of the most valuable free agents that any team could have. Not just because of his talent, not just because of his brand, not just because of his history, but because of how well that he could slide into a lot of these roles, right? He is a great player to work with. He has that veteran leadership, can have some IGL abilities, and just came off of one of his best seasons ever in a newfound role. So the reason why I talk about that is because there have been talks about maybe Attach could head over to maybe the LA Gorillas. Maybe he comes in for Spart in this position, and then you'd obviously have Arcitys if he's having conversations with LAG. He gets word that Attach is going to be here. Maybe they work together, and instead you see Arcitys now in place of Slasher. You have Attach and Arcitys who are now on LAG. Maybe they lure in some interesting free agent SMG players alongside of them if these 2 guys are headed to Florida or headed somewhere else. Maybe the same thing works out for LAG if maybe Attach isn't here, but Cammy is, right? Or maybe if Skies is in this position. I think that would absolutely lure a player like Arcitys maybe to a new start on LAG. I think it's possible. I'd put it on the list, but it definitely would not be at the top of it. LAG, with 5 players currently under contract, have a lot of work to do. And I think if you are going to try to bring in a player like Arcitys, you got to attract him with a lot of other free agent pieces out there. Moving on to the Thieves. I mean, would LA Thieves really make a move for Arcitys? They just went back to back. They won a world championship. They played some of the cleanest COD we have seen in a very long time. In Vanguard, they already have 3 capable AR players on this team. Honestly, I think for the reasons that LA Thieves are, of course, off of a W, right? They just went back to back. They just won a world championship, for God's sake. On top of, I feel like LA Thieves wouldn't really get the full value, wouldn't get the full skill set that somebody like Arcitys can provide. So I think for both of those reasons, I just don't really see it happening here for the Thieves. You know, for London Royal Ravens, there's been no real talk about London lately. I think they're pretty clear cut on most likely what they want to do. Maybe keeping things in region. Now moving over to the Minnesota Rocker, I think that there is also potential for this one. You know, right now they have a very open slate. Minnesota is known as a franchise that has a great reputation. I don't think I've ever heard a player say a negative thing about them. Maybe, right, you give Arcitys the keys, right? Maybe you let him play the flex or the main AR, whatever he would prefer. He's playing the main, makes things a little bit easier with the flex options that are available. And again, I talked about that piece in Attach, previously a part of the Minnesota Rocker. He's aware of this fan base. He's aware of the organization, the way that they like to do things. And I know that Attach had that tweet, you know, talking about how things could be over or whatever, you know, don't cry because it's over type deal. However, if he knows that Arcitys is interested in teaming with him, and maybe Minnesota becomes a top option for whatever reason, maybe because of the SMGs that they could already be having on this team, maybe Attach would be incredibly interested to try and reform a roster back on Minnesota. So if you are Rocker, you've got Arcitys, you have got Attach, you have 2 great pieces. So I do think that Minnesota could be a very valuable spot for somebody like Arcitys. And again, it comes down to that Attach conversation, and we'll continue to have that. Now venturing into the New York subliners. This to me is one of the more intriguing options out there. It does sound like, right, that with all the Optic Texas news starting to be swept under the rug, now that they're sticking together, it sounds like Hydra was the original piece that New York were rocking with, right, with Crim6 now as an unrestricted free agent, Paul, who currently sits on the bench. That leaves AR positions open, and it now leaves for Hydra to do what he wants with the team. There's been a lot of noise, right, about what options that Hydra would like to have on this roster. You know, earlier on, one of the first talks that we had on Roster Mania was the addition of Hydra. His first choice sounded like it was Skies. Well, that fills the flex role, and who could just slide into this team incredibly easy? It would be Arcitys, right? Arcitys could slide into here as the main AR, and this maybe could be what New York moves forward with for the next few seasons. And it doesn't just have to be, you know, Sky's in this position. Maybe, again, like I said, it's Attach who's willing to go back to New York as he did in the MW season. Maybe you bring in a player like Cammy and you have Hydra, Kismet, Cammy, and Arcitys. Maybe Kismet doesn't stay on this team. The options really are endless for New York. And the positive for them is that unlike a lot of franchises out there, they do have 2 designated SMGs, one of which is without question a franchise type of player, somebody that you would build around in Hydra. And if I'm New York, right, if you have Hydra, which it sounds like they want to keep him for as long as possible, you also bring in a player like Arcitys. These are 2 players that I would hit with the 3-year contract if it is an option, right? Build around these 2 guys for the future. Have Arcitys give all of that mentorship, the IGL abilities, work on somebody like Hydra, right? He is absolutely qualified to be on this team and then some, given the young SMG talent that he's worked with previously. So if I'm New York and I want Hydra to be an Abizi or a Simp, best way you do that is you bring in Arcitys, the guy who was just with them. Now moving on to the Las Vegas Legion, you know, there's been players like Clay linked here, possibly. I think there's been some people talking about how TJ maybe could go to the Las Vegas Legion as an SMG. I doubt it. I mean, it's possible if there's some, you know, very influential pieces in this position. The only problem is that, again, the SMGs are difficult. It sounds like Las Vegas, if Clay is here, then you've got Temp and Clay. Where does Arcitys fit in? He absolutely doesn't. He wants to have that AR in his hands for obvious reasons. Okay, but I've been waiting to get to this team, Seattle Surge. This is one of my favorite options, if not my outright favorite. I'll say it right now. Role-wise, imagine, right? Imagine if accuracy is out, Arcitys is in as your main AR for Seattle Surge. Role-wise, of course, it makes sense. If Seattle feels like that the young guns have learned everything that they can from Lamar, now it's time to bring in a consistent slayer, someone who could bring a better balance to what was a very inconsistent Seattle last season, right? They go from winning tournaments to getting last place. I mean, at one point they were losing to the Paris Legion, giving them their first win of the season. They later go on at the very next major to play incredibly well. Then they play horrible at the Pro-Am. They eventually win Major 3. They get 12th at Major 4. You kind of get my thoughts. And they later go on to get a top 3 finish at COD Champs. The one thing that Seattle was not able to master was consistency. And somebody like Arcitys, and you could say, well, Atlanta FaZe, they weren't consistent last year. That's a lie, right? They didn't win anything last year, but they were the most consistent team in the game. You look at Arcitys, his role, what he was able to do with Atlanta FaZe in these last 2 years. Granted, a lot of second place finishes, but you talk about the grand final opportunities, the amount of finals that Atlanta FaZe were in, that he has been in since he joined FaZe. Granted, a lot of talent on the team, similar to New York that I talked about. He is more than qualified to be on basically any and every single position, especially with the Seattle Surge. And there was no doubt about it, right? The young talent that exists on this team. I think Pred, who deserved to be an MVP candidate, you know, became the Rookie of the Year. Sib was obviously in the All-Star second team. Pred was in the All-Star first team. So many accolades, a great first year. Really for all 3 of these players, but for obviously Pred and Sib specifically. But like I said, Arcitys fits the bill exactly what you'd want for Seattle Surge. Like I said, accuracy, who is a great player. I think these guys love to work with him. If you are looking for a change, if you are looking to bring him out of the team, I think Arcitys is the perfect fit for this Surge roster, right? He fills that gap of being the IGL. He is more than willing to sacrifice his level of play for the betterment of the team. He can help improve comms. People forget how talented of a player that he is, and the fact that he would have the opportunity, if you do have, you know, more of an inconsistent performance from somebody like Sib, you improve him in that department by showing how to be a consistent AR. And so I love the opportunity for Arcitys to be able to work with Pred and Sib along with Mac. You've got great comms here, I think. And then at the same time, Arcitys has that opportunity to really showcase his skills, to really showcase the talent that we all know that he has had, and honestly that he hasn't really had the opportunity to showcase by being on a star-studded Atlanta FaZe lineup. And one thing that I will say about the Seattle Surge is that in the first year of the CDL, Arcitys, I think originally before he later go into the Huntsman, was linked to Seattle alongside players like Envoy and Octane. Now that obviously did not end up happening. There's different management, different players now, but Mac, Pred, Sib, and Arcitys on paper would instantly become, at least for me, one of the favorites moving in to MW2. Like, do we really talk about Optic Texas? Yes. Now, do I feel like Arcitys is still in the running, especially after the stream sound bites that we heard last night? Probably not, but I will say if somehow this managed to happen, we don't know any of the details that's really going on with Illy. There were a world in which, let's say that something happens, let's say that Illy is not available in Arcitys for some reason, and Arcitys has the ability to slide in here either as the flex or the main AR. This would be great. This would be a very well-functioning team and probably one of the favorites, I would say. There's no doubt about that. I know Scump and Arcitys loved being teammates when they played with each other previously. Arcitys knows how to win, similar to Illy, in that he is a tactician, great in game, phenomenal leader, just a great voice when you are in the closer, more intense type of situations. Somebody who is willing to sacrifice his stats for the rest of the team. I think Dashy, Arcitys, Scump, and Shotzzy would be a sensational looking lineup moving into MW2. Does it sound likely right now? Obviously it does not, but again, nothing really sounds likely that's going on right now, so I will mention it just for that reason. But I do feel like Arcitys is one of those rosters that is not going to be making a move right now. And then the last team, Toronto Ultra, I feel like they technically could be a front runner. It sounds like an announcement could be on the way soon for Ultra based off some of the tweets that they've had. And while it does, feel like the AR pieces are somewhat locked in, it feels like the instant addition would be Scrappy and Insight as your ARs. If Arcitys is available, Toronto catches word of this. I mentioned this term a lot. It is a sports term. Would Toronto have a conversation about it? If Arcitys is willing, or maybe even if he's not, they don't even know yet, would they take the conversation with Arcitys? If I am Toronto, I would have a conversation about it. That doesn't mean that you would, but you would at least talk about maybe doing it. And I don't know, it feels like the most likely option would be Arcitys in at the main AR, and then you have Scrappy and him working together in that position. And then there's been a lot of people linking Afro potentially to the Toronto Ultra. So you have Kleenex, Afro, Scrappy, and Arcitys. Not a whole lot of shades of the prior Toronto roster, but we know the culture around Toronto. It feels like that would match up. Similar winning mentality is what Arcitys has, is what Toronto has. It's about playing fundamental right Call of Duty. So I feel like it would match up that way. Plus you have Afro, who I think is such a great talent, somebody who I believe personally has the chance to be one of the 5 best players in the game. So having him alongside Scrappy, who without question is the most hot prospect right now in challengers, would be incredible. It would be fun to watch that. And Arcitys, the ability for him to be able to lead these young group of players, also to have that spotlight specifically on him, something that he really hasn't had with the Atlanta FaZe, something he didn't have with the Chicago Huntsmen, to be able to have that now alongside what could be a more fundamental role in terms of they might need him to be a great and solid slayer a lot of the time. Okay, so if I had to make my 5 favorite destinations for Arcitys, number 1 is Seattle. For the reasons that we talked about, it just feels like a glove type of fit in place of accuracy. I don't know. It feels like New York. They are a hot commodity for a lot of top free agents out there. I think that they are one of those teams that if they came calling and said, hey, we have Arcitys and we have Hydra, attached. Do you want to come over here? Sure. Hey, Cammy, you want to come over here? Sure. Skies, you want to come over here? Sure. They have the pick of the litter in a lot of top free agents, especially if they can lock in Arcitys and they can lock in Hydra for sure. So I really like New York. I will say, depending on what goes on with Toronto, I guess I really want him here in place of Insight. Toronto is a very intriguing option, to be able to play alongside Afro and Scrappy. I think it would be dependent on what Arcitys wants to do. Is he interested in kind of starting over, working with young players, or does he want to have a role alongside somebody like Attach and maybe alongside somebody like Hydra, somebody who's really already shown what the capability is? That would be dependent on what his wants are. So I feel like Toronto could be up there. I think that really Toronto, LAG, maybe even Minnesota, all for their own unique reasons, are kind of paired together. And a lot of it, like I said, has to do with who is he playing alongside. So for Toronto, it would be like, hey, are you willing to play with young talent? For Minnesota and LAG, who do you want to play with? Who are you willing to bring alongside of you? Do you have that opportunity to maybe work alongside a player like Attach? And then also from the organization standpoint, are you willing to pay for somebody like Arcitys, because he is a restricted free agent? Is there a trade that could work out? Maybe there is a situation where Insight for Arcitys becomes a thing. I don't see that being likely. I think that Atlanta would need a little bit more than that for obvious reasons, but at the same time, it is something interesting to think about. A lot of these franchises, I believe, will be very interested in somebody like Arcitys. Like I said, believe that Seattle is just the most likely one. That is considering that Optic Texas is off of the table, because if Optic is, then they'd probably slide into number one for me. Now, quickly before we do round out this video, something that I do want to talk about just for a moment is what Atlanta FaZe, who could be their fourth and final piece. If I am any free agent out there and Atlanta FaZe is interested in me, you go there. They become your first priority simply because of the fact that they are going to be favorites as winners no matter what. Abizi, Simp, and Celium, you get to work alongside those three players either as a flex or a main AR. You take that position every single day of the week. If I were to list off three players who I think could be available or will be available and would make a nice addition to Atlanta, I would say the first one, and not in any particular order, but I guess I am kind of ordering them. First one would be Attach. I feel like just from a role standpoint, he'd make the most sense. He'd come in as the flex. Celium would then be that main AR for them. He is easy to work with. He has the history with FaZe, the brand, all of those things. Just a great leader. The one thing that I would worry about is that, like, can he really lead the troops the same way that Arcitys did? It's a new role for him. This would be his first official season in this role, because he did rock it to like the last half of the season back in Vanguard. So that would really be my only level of concern if I am Atlanta FaZe. Is bringing in Attach a great option? Absolutely. But in that flex role, a very valuable position, does he have the ability, to do that full time on one of the, if not the hottest team in the league? Another player that to me would make ultimate sense for the Atlanta FaZe would be Cammy. Role-wise, he'd make perfect sense. He slides in as the flex as well. He is a restricted free agent, so it would take some work for FaZe to get him. But just an excellent fundamental player. Comes from a system that I think Atlanta FaZe has envied throughout the past two seasons, especially back in Cold War. I mean, that was their kryptonite. That was the only thing that could take them down, was the teamwork out of Toronto. And we know that Cammy back in Cold War was a top 3, top 4 player, really right alongside some of these Atlanta FaZe guys as well. So I think there's a lot of organizations who are betting on the fact that Cammy in Vanguard, whether it was the team or whether it was the title, Atlanta FaZe very much feels like that game was not good for them. Maybe they realize, hey, if Cammy is back in form the same way that he was in Cold War alongside of us, we may be another unbeatable type of lineup. So I think that Cammy is absolutely one of the favorites to join this Atlanta FaZe team. Now, another one that I'm going to mention is definitely going to be a little bit controversial, and that would be Clay. I know it's crazy, but he could maybe come in as the main, if they are looking at, if Crowder is no longer going to be the lead coach of this team, maybe you want to have a more stable veteran voice, somebody who is going to be able to organize the troops. If they feel like Arcitys, maybe just the relationship between himself and the three other players just weren't where they, need to be. He's got a great history with Simp and Abizi. They won a world championship back in Black Ops 4. Again, I don't think that it is a likely move, but it just feels like if you are looking for an AR, I will say that if you are looking for an AR, Attach and Cammy would be your first two picks. And I feel like with the other AR choices that are out there, none of them really mix with what Atlanta FaZe wants to do. If Dashy is not going to be on the table, if Illy is not going to be on the table, I do feel like Clay would slide into one of the favorites. And then the last thing that I'll say about Atlanta FaZe, if they are interested in bringing in an SMG, because there were rumors that they could try and bring in a player like Shotzi. If Simp does have the desire to switch to that flex, and there is rumors that indicate that he would be the guy to do it, he could be interested in doing that. Celium would be main, Simp would be flex, and then you make some room in the SMGs for Abizi to be alongside somebody maybe like Hydra. Now, again, I know that it sounds like New York is all in on Hydra. That seems like the choice. But if that is available and you are Hydra and you're thinking, hey, I could be alongside New York, me and Kismet together, maybe we bring in Skies, or I can be on Atlanta FaZe with the Abizi, Simp, and Celium, you have something to think about. Also for Atlanta, he is unrestricted. Are you going to pay the guy a lot of money? Absolutely. But you don't have to worry about a buyout right now. So I would say that Hydra absolutely is up there, dependent on what Atlanta FaZe wants to do with the roles. Maybe they're not happy with the AR options that are out there. So maybe they're looking at the SMGs and bring Simp more into that flex position, as he was using that, throughout a majority of the title, on different maps, whether it was on the Gavutus or even if it was in Search Destroy at different moments. Maybe he felt more comfortable in that position. if Atlanta really liked what they saw to Pred this year, given the fact that it was his rookie season. You know, he would basically be in this role the exact same way that Hydra was, an incredibly talented Slayer. Maybe they could rip him away from Surge. It would not be easy in any way, shape, or form to do that, but it's possible. And I would say the last SMG, but for a different reason, that maybe Atlanta FaZe would bring in, and it would be, I would say, probably the most unlikely of all the options that I've talked about, could be Bans. Now, the reason why I talk about that is the exact same reason that I discussed the Toronto point for Cammy. You know, just a great system player, somebody who is willing to take the long route, somebody who will sacrifice his life for the betterment of the team, basically a coach in your lineup. Benjamin Bans is one of my favorite players. And I think that Atlanta FaZe, if they were interested, let's say they're like, hey, we definitely want to move Simp to the flex. We cannot get Hydra. We cannot get Pred. Bans could be one of your guys for a different type of reason that could do basically what a veteran would do, but in more of an SMG position. So it would be very specific, but those are the guys that I listed out: Attach, Cammy, Clay, Hydra, Pred, Bans. Those are some choices that I think Atlanta FaZe will work with, and one of them, I believe, will be added in as the fourth to this team, if again those moves and those rumors are true. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, what a jam-packed video. We talked about Atlanta FaZe, the fact that they've split apart, potentially. What does that mean for Arcitys? Where could he go? What fourths could Atlanta FaZe be looking out for? So we talked about that, at least I did. I want to hear what your guys' thoughts are down in the comments below. What do you think is going on with Arcitys and Atlanta FaZe's relationship? What do you make of these recent tweets? How mind-blown are you that Atlanta FaZe are truly splitting apart from each other? And what does this mean, obviously, for the league moving forward? Who do you think Atlanta could get as the fourth? Where does Arcitys end up being in MW2? Lots of great conversations that can obviously happen down in the comments below. If you guys have not done so already, make sure to like, make sure to subscribe. I greatly appreciate the support that we've had on the channel. We are entering into that 6K range, which I appreciate more than you know. We will be back on the channel very soon with some more amazing off-season content, and I'll see you guys here back on the channel in just a bit.